I want to unpack what is going on in Zimbabwe and um, where do we go next. I haven't been that active um, in politics, but I realize perhaps I need to chip in. I want to talk about Geza. I am going in a minute to help you understand him better. And I also want to talk about, I want to go back to Kuda Kwashitagwire. But this time, I'm hoping you can understand it better. Let me give some context to this. There is factional politics in Zimbabwe, 100%. There is factional politics across the world. There is factional politics in South African politics, in ANC politics, in the United Kingdom politics, and American politics. So push aside the idea that is it factional politics or not. There is factional politics, okay? Now, I want to talk about then why does Geza matter? Or does it? Let me give a disclaimer. I have never met Geza. I don't know Geza. He strikes me as somebody who is on a suicide mission. And he's not just on a suicide mission, he's wearing a suicide vest and he wants to take others with him. Let me explain. Anytime I see someone who is always by themselves and it's only them who's speaking, it's a red flag to me. It makes me realize that what Geza is doing is not about Geza. It's about, what Geza is doing is not about you. It's about him. So I don't believe that Geza understands the future that he wants to campaign for. I'm not sure there's any business or investor who, if Geza ever walked into your office, you would take him seriously. He's not fit for medical policy anywhere in the world. If he walks into any medical insurance, they consider him high risk. They wouldn't give him one. If he walks into a funeral parlor, they wouldn't even give him a funeral policy. I have nothing against Geza. I don't know him, like I said. I just want you to understand that Geza is not the answer. In fact, Geza will get you hurt. I will start listening to Geza when he starts aligning with Hopewell Chingono, when he starts aligning with Nelson Chimisa, when he starts aligning with Kudakwasha Musasiwa. They've all been there before doing exactly the same thing that he thinks he's doing. Why is he not going to sit down with them first? In fact, before you had even started this, one of the fundamental pillars that made November work when the coup that's not a coup happened is there was very, very good alignment and interdependence from invested groups, organizations, and political associations. That was a very big secret to it. I don't trust Geza. So whatever it is that you think he's doing, I know he will end you in a lot of trouble. There's a reason the Ivan Mawari court date didn't work. That maybe I've never spoken about, or I've never heard anybody speak about. It's whenever you do this kind of things, like stayaways, like marches, like coming out on the streets, the trouble and the problem is, in the end, people go home. So you're talking about people who come out, they wear a flag, they tie a flag on their necks, even if the police don't touch them. But at a certain point, they have to go home. They have microwave food that they must eat. They have school tomorrow, work tomorrow, and they stop. The revolts that have worked the greatest are revolts where people don't go home. So you cannot make it an event. You have to make it a revolt. And that's very, very dangerous for me to think about a revolt that is led by Geza. So sorry, I'm not on the bus. I'm not on the bus. But now let me talk about Queen Bee. I also have to equally give context and backstory to this. I want to give a disclaimer that I actually know Kudakwashe Tagire. I baptized into Seventh Day Adventist many years ago, and Kuda Tagwire's wife, sister, and brother are part of the reason I even ended up going to Christ. So I want to give context to that. But I also want to remind you, I'm the same person who introduced you to Queen Bee, who told you that Kuda Kwashe Tagwire had a lot of people on his fingers. I was hired to work for the Ministry of Finance in Zimbabwe, lost the job before I even got the Wi-Fi password. But I need to have the context so that you understand if I'm biased or not biased. So I say that to say, I am not giving this perspective from a perspective of somebody who is biased towards him or against him. I'm giving this perspective from somebody who understands the inner workings of government and inner workings of interdiplomacy. Listen to this. In the year 2020, Kuda Tagwire was added to the Zimbabwe sanctions list. He was a newcomer to the list, equally the same with President Mnangagwa's son. They were added to the sanctions list. When they were added to the sanctions list by the United States Treasury Department and the UK Foreign Sanctions Office, they were then graduated to a new list called McKinsey program, which now makes it global. What the sanctions intended to do is they intended to answer a question that how do we control whoever is in control of the Zimbabwean economy? Here's the problem, and it's a conversation we don't talk about enough, but it's a conversation that's going to lead to how we actually figure out what is next. There is bad intelligence in Zimbabwe, very bad intelligence. The president of the country is fed incredibly bad intelligence, and unfortunately, bad intelligence caused the sanctions. Bad intelligence of people who were worked on by the CIA in America, very close to Tagwire and very close to the president and very close to the intelligence apparatus of the country, fed in to what became an unmanageable position, except to take a position, and that position was put him on sanctions. Here's the problem with the country. When you do that, here's what happens when you put somebody on sanctions. You blacklist them. You're saying to the world, don't do business with this person because this person is bad. Don't do business with this person because this person is anti-us. And he cannot do business with us, and he cannot do business in our country. I don't believe that those sanctions had anything to do with the reasons that were given. I think those sanctions had everything to do with there were already monopolies established and set up in Zimbabwe, operating across sectors, whether you want to talk about telecoms, whether you want to talk about agriculture, whether you want to talk about industry and commerce. There were cartels or oligopolies, as Chris calls them, that were already in apparatus. And those were about to be disturbed by, once again, a new wave of black empowerment, which we've seen before and actually happened before in Zimbabwe. But now it was about to happen and they didn't have control of it. So what happened is, first line of attack was the monopolizers who already were controlling the economy, and they did not want a new player coming to destabilize the oligopoly. Second is there was bad intelligence fed from Kuda Kwashe, people very close to Kuda Kwashe Tagwire, who I choose not to mention, people who were very close to the president, who espionaged on the country, some people who are in cabinet today. Third thing that happened is Mthuli, who, when he came in, he was on a charm offensive to convince the American government we can do business, we can be friends. Zimbabwe was on a turning page, but there was no immediate position that he had given, especially on the land reform issue, and that created incredible anxiety and discomfort in the power brokers. So, and then of course you got Tendai Biti, who had been championing the establishment of the sanctions, who's now ironically fighting them. But when all of this takes place, what happens as a result is sanctions are placed. They do absolutely nothing to aid the effort that they were intended to aid. But why do I bring it up as something that is happening in Zimbabwe? When you put the biggest negotiators, the biggest deal makers in the country on a sanctions list, and you restrict them from doing business in a straight way, you force them to go and do business in a side way. Now, it's not an advantage for command agriculture to continue, and we can't buy on a perfect competition or an open competition market. It's not an advantage when we can't have a fight of capital coming into the country and people are worried about how does the US dollar move. You create an environment because you're trying to implement a sanction that causes unfair and painful deficit on the person who you actually intend to be helping. I don't want this to go over your head. What I intend to say is marches are not the solution. They've never really been. Not even in Mugabe's case, by the way, it wasn't the march. You have to fight the issue of sanctions, and the most meaningful contribution people in the diaspora can make, that is not voting, that is not being on the ground, is to communicate to their parliaments, to communicate to the governments where they are, and make the case that why don't you remove this? If governments continue to say sanctions don't matter, so why don't you remove sanctions on the person who we claim is running the country and allow us to see, because every academic, every scholar, every analyst who has spoken, I was listening to an interview by Hope Wichingono, you should check it out on the South African network, and he speaks very articulately about this. Sanctions don't work. But to remove sanctions is not going to take, unfortunately, Geza will only create a new set of sanctions. It'll take you